Hey, Damien here for Automotive Superstore. This time around, it's the top 5 things you need to know when buying a 5-channel amplifier. Now, before I get started, let's talk about 5-channel amplifiers versus 6-channel amplifiers because you'll find them both in the same section of our website. 5-channel amplifiers are really designed to run fronts, rears and subwoofer or tweeter mid-bass subwoofer, whereas a 6-channel, it can do that, but it's more ideally suited to tweeter, mid-range, rear fill or tweeter, mid-range, mid-bass, that sort of thing. Because bridging 2 channels together, you're limited to a 4 ohm impedance, and output power, you're probably limited to about 300 watts RMS from any of the 6-channel amplifiers we sell. Whereas the 5-channel models for roughly the same price can give you more power or are more flexible, or because their sub-channel works into 2 ohms, you have more choice of subwoofers. And so, don't mix 5 channels and 6 channels up too much. If you just really need a 5-channel amplifier for the application, stick with those. Tip number 1. Think about your power output first, and that pertains to what speakers are going to be used in the car. So, all 5-channel amplifiers have a combination of 4 main channels plus the 5th channel for your subwoofer. The main channels will make somewhere between 60 and 80 watts RMS into a 4 ohm load. Look at the 4 ohm ratings because most speakers that you'll connect to them are 4 ohms other than the rare things from, say, someone like Morel or Helix. But most full range speakers are 4 ohms, so just focus on that power rating for the main, front and rear channels for your amplifier. It's the sub channel that's actually going to make the big difference. What I mean by that is most of the entry level or the most affordable 5-channel amplifiers will have power outputs of 300 watts RMS or 350 watts RMS into a 2 ohm load. And that's okay for, entry level moderate bass output. What's important there is if you're going to buy an amplifier that makes 300 watts RMS into a 2 ohm load, make sure you put a 2 ohm load on that. And what is that? Well, it's either a subwoofer that has a single 2 ohm voice coil, or like this Serwin Vega here, it has 2 4 ohm voice coils and you wire them in parallel. So positive to positive, into the positive of the amplifier, negative to negative to the negative of the amplifier. That's parallel wiring, and that will be a 2 ohm load, and you'll get the full 300 watts RMS out of that amplifier. But if you want more than 300 watts RMS, well then you need to shop a little bit higher up in the price range. So I chose for my own car, Kenwood's XH901.5, because this one gave me 60 watts RMS by 4, but 600 watts RMS by 1, so twice the bass power of the entry-level amplifiers, and that gives a lot more bass output, and I can run a much more powerful subwoofer, or even 2 or 3 in the system. So think about that when you're choosing your amplifier to begin with. How much bass do you really want? Because that's going to decide whether you're going to buy an entry-level 5-channel or something a bit more powerful. Tip number 2, decide on your speaker array before choosing your amplifier, because that's going to determine what type of crossover filtering your amplifier is going to need. Let me explain a bit further. So, traditional arrangement for a 5-channel amplifier will be a pair of full range speakers off channels 1 and 2, so a pair of these off channels 1 and 2, another pair of them again in the rear of the car off channels 3 and 4, and then your subwoofer off channel 5. If that's your speaker array, that's nice and simple. Every single 5-channel amplifier that's sold has the basic filters to provide a high pass filter for these and a low pass filter for the subwoofer. You're good to go. Now, the second most common way of wiring a 5-channel amplifier up would be to dispense of the passive crossovers from your component set, and you'll use channels 1 and 2 to power the tweeters, 3 and 4 to power your mid-range drivers, and then channel 5 for your subwoofer. Now, what's really important is if you aren't using any external signal processor or there's no advanced crossover filtering in your aftermarket head unit, you're going to need the crossover filters to suit this arrangement in the amplifier. I have to say, only a handful of amplifiers, and this Hertz HCP 5D is one of them, offer those types of crossover filters, because your tweeters need to be high pass from anywhere between 3,000 and 5,000 Hertz and upwards. Your mid-range need to have a band pass filter from that point down to about 100 to 80 Hertz, and that takes away the high and the low frequencies, and then of course the low pass filter for the subwoofer. Then there's what's called the semi-active setup, and that reintroduces the passive crossover, but adds a small mid-range driver between the tweeter and the mid-bass. And so each one of these speakers needs to operate in its specific frequency band. The passive crossover splits the frequencies between the tweeter and the mid-range, but the mid-range still needs a high-pass filter from say 300 or 400 hertz. Also, the mid-bass driver needs to take over from 300 or 400 hertz and run down to 100 hertz. And so for that, the crossovers in this will need to be adjustable somewhere around the 300 to 400 hertz mark, high and low pass, or maybe even band pass for the mid-bass driver output. So if your amplifier does not have a band pass feature for the mid-bass channels, you can cheat that a little bit. If you've got an aftermarket source unit that's got built-in crossovers, you can get the high pass for your mid-bass at that source unit. Now, tip number 3, think about the extra features and tuning tools that you might need to get the best sound quality out of your system, or to give you a handy feature you might lack in your system as it is. A good example of that is remote level controllers. Now, almost all 5-channel amplifiers will have the ability to control the sub-level via remote level controller. However, not every single one of them comes with that in the box. Some of them it's sold as an option, like for example on this Hertz amplifier here, or Kenwood's entry-level 5-channel amplifier. That one, it's optional. It's a really handy feature to have, especially if you're adding this amplifier to an otherwise factory head unit, or your car's got the factory source unit in the car. In that instance, you have no way of controlling the sub-level compared to the rest of the speakers in the car, so remote level control is a really handy feature to have. Besides that, other features like bass processing, so variable bass boost for the 5th channel, fixed or variable subsonic filter is really handy to have. A subsonic filter is really handy if you have a ported enclosure, because you can set that high pass filter for the sub just below the port tuning frequency, and that protects the subwoofer from ultra low frequencies below port tuning. So another interesting feature to have is the ability to turn the amplifier on and off in different ways. Now, this Selwyn Vega amplifier and many Selwyn Vega amplifiers have this feature, as does this Hertz and some other models. What it is, it's a 2 or 3 position switch that gives you varying ways to turn the amplifier on and off. First, obviously, is the traditional trigger connection. When you're connecting to an aftermarket source unit, it's a signal wire that goes to the aftermarket source unit, and when that turns on, it sends 12 volts. Down here, it tells the amplifier to turn on. When you turn your head unit off, it tells the amplifier to turn off. Very simple. Now, the second way is to sense the music signal coming into the speaker level inputs, which is more common in an installation where you've got the factory head unit still in the car, so you don't have RCA pre-outs and you don't have a trigger from the car. It's very common in cars, especially the ones that have push button starts. So that way we use the speaker level inputs, and the amplifier sees the AC waveform coming in. It goes, oh, I can see music, so I'll turn the amplifier on. And then when it hasn't seen a music signal for a period of time, it says, oh, there's no more music coming, I'll turn the amplifier back off again. The third way is to use voltage sensing on the power terminals, and that way the amp says, oh, the car's turned on because the alternator has floated the voltage up, and so I can turn the amplifier on. And when you turn your car off, the voltage comes back down again to around 12 volts, and the amp says, oh, I can see that you've turned the car off, I'll turn the amplifier off. Tip number 4, think about where the amplifier is going to go in your car and whether the amplifiers you're shopping for are actually going to fit. For example, this Hertz amplifier is much larger physically than, say, this Selwyn Vega amplifier. And so you might have to go, well, I'm going to choose an ultra compact model like this one instead of this one, just because it's going to fit where I want it to go. Also, a smaller amplifier can fit closer maybe to where the battery is, and that means you can buy smaller gauge cabling. So it's a way you can save money that way. That's one consideration. Another thing to think about is where the connections are on the amplifier and where the wiring is going to run through the car. So ideally you want the power cable to come down one side and signal cables to come down the other. And in most amplifiers, for example, you'll have power connections on one side and then speaker connections on the other, or RCAs on the other. That's certainly the case with this Hertz amplifier, where you've got speaker and power connections on this end and then your RCA and inputs on this end. There are other models like the Stroker series from Selwyn Vega, where all the connections are all along one side of the amplifier. Another thing to think about is access to the controls and switches. And so you don't want to place those so that once it's in the car, you can't get to them to adjust crossovers or set input sensitivity levels or things like that. Besides that, this is kind of a last weird tip for you, is maybe it's better to buy 2 amplifiers than 1. And so what that means is, instead of buying one 5-channel amplifier all in one, you should maybe buy a mono and a matching 4-channel and place those maybe one under each seat, and maybe that's a better option for you than to buy a 5-channel to begin with. And finally, tip number 5. Now we know how much power in total watts RMS our amplifier is going to make. We know where in the car it's going to go and how far that is from the battery. We know how physically large the amplifier is, and we know whether we're using one amplifier to power everything, or we actually chose a 4-channel and a mono to do the same task. We can now choose the wiring kit to suit that specific task. Here's a chart. Now this shows you on the vertical scale, it's going to be watts RMS of total power output of all your amplifier power combined. And that's important that it's into the impedance load. So 2 ohms for subwoofer and 4 ohm for main speakers, for example. Across the bottom, we've got the distance between your amplifier and the actual battery in the car. If you cross-reference those, you'll find my recommended power cable gauge thickness that you'll need to get the job done properly. Now there are a couple of ways you can do the wiring, especially when it comes to multi-channel amplifiers like this. The first and most basic way is to start with an amplifier wiring kit, and it's just the power, earth trigger, and the fuse holder and a fuse, and you choose that again based on the distance and the power output for the amplifier itself. Once you've done that, you can add the RCA connections. If you have RCAs, you might be integrating this into a factory system and not require RCAs, and that's why these kits are really good and they're handy and save you a lot of money. If you do need RCAs, this kit also allows you to choose RCAs the length you need. So typically the ones that come in the kits will be 5 meters length, and maybe you only need 2 or 3 meters. And this way you can actually buy the RCA length required from your source unit to the amplifier. That's nice. Then of course there are complete wiring kits. So this one here from Silver & Vega gives you 4 gauge power and earth and 3 sets of RCAs. It's suitable for 6 and 5 channel amplifiers. Or somewhere in between that, you could start with a 4-channel amplifier kit and just add an extra pair of RCAs as required. Of course, if you end up using a separate 4-channel and mono amplifier, you're going to need to mix and match these wiring kits to get the exact wiring that you require. So now you know everything that you need to know to buy a fantastic 5-channel amplifier. Down below you'll see a link that'll take you through to our website where you'll always get a smoking deal at Automotive Superstore. While down there, like and subscribe. See you next time.